Hello and welcome to the EV Life podcast. I'm your host, Krystal Maharaj. Thank you for joining me for another episode. And if this is your first time tuning in, welcome. Today's episode is going to focus on EV charging infrastructure, both in Alberta and across Canada. And this is a concern that many people have when it comes to EVs because, there are gas stations everywhere. I don't think people really worry about where they're going to find a gas station to, fuel up their car. But there are still several EV deserts in Alberta and, across Canada, especially when you're outside of those major metropolitan centers. So we have two really great interviews to share with you today. Our first interview is with the Municipal Climate Change Action Centre, or MCCAC, and with the organizers behind the EV Coast to Coast Tour. So first up, we have the MCCAC, and they are a collaborative initiative between Alberta municipalities, the rural municipalities of Alberta, and the government of Alberta. So a few different collaborations going on there. And what they do is provide funding and technical assistance and education to municipalities and community organizations. So they've kind of been operating since 2009, and they've funded millions of dollars for solar energy, efficiency renovations, and EV purchases, and more. So their programs are helping Alberta's municipalities achieve real change for the climate. Last year, the MCCAC and AMA, so this podcast is, of course, put on by AMA, we worked closely with them on the EV charging stations that opened at some of our centers in November. So if you've been to our centers in Edmonton, Medicine Hat, and Lethbridge, you'll see our snazzy new EV chargers. And that was thanks in part to the MCCAC. As administrators for the Southgrow electric vehicle charging program, the MCCAC has supported a significant build out of EV charging across the province. To learn more, I sat down for a great conversation with Logan Hoyland, project associate with the MCCAC. So without further ado, let's jump into that interview. So the Municipal Climate Change Action Centre, what exactly is it?
So the MCCAC is a collaborative initiative between Alberta municipalities, the rural municipalities of Alberta, and the government of Alberta. We provide funding, technical assistance, and education to Alberta municipalities, nonprofits, schools, and other businesses in addressing climate change. We have a variety of different programs in electric vehicles and as well as capacity building for helping municipalities.
So how did the MCCAC get involved with electric vehicles? Why was this something that you guys picked up as a project?
So we've been seeing a lot of increased demand for EVs throughout the province and specifically for municipalities and through some funding that has available through the provincial and federal government, specifically through the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program that's offered through the Canadian government. We've received funding from that program to assist municipalities in helping build out infrastructure for municipalities, as well as through the Southgrow electric vehicle charging program as well, mainly in southern Alberta for businesses and other applicants as well.
So how does it kind of get started when you're working with a municipality? Is it sort of up to the municipality to reach out to you and say, hey, we'd like a little bit of assistance with building infrastructure for EV charging, or do you all do the outreach? How does that look?
So it's normally municipalities who reach out to us. All of our information can be found on our website, all of our different programs and how they work. Municipalities are then welcome to submit an expression of interest. We go through that, then schedule a meeting to meet with the municipality or whoever applies, kind of go through how the program works. So the program status, eligibility, funding levels, the application process, next steps. And then the municipality takes that information. They then put together an application package, which includes just some basic information about the chargers themselves, as well as some quotes from an installer or a supplier who will actually do the installation process of the chargers themselves. Once that's all been completed, we'll then do a couple project verification steps, make sure everything's accurate, up to date, it's working, and then we will issue a rebate to the municipality or whoever applies for funding after that project has been completed.
And are you seeing a lot of interest from municipalities across Alberta in building infrastructure for electric vehicle charging?
Yeah, for sure. So our original electric vehicle charging program, which was exclusive to municipalities, it's now been closed because 100% of the funding was fully allocated
Wow.
to all municipalities throughout the province. And now we have a different program. It's called the South Grow Electric Vehicle Charging Program, which offers a 46% rebate to applicants. And we're starting to see a significant increase in interest throughout the province as well for a variety of municipalities, businesses, multi-unit residential buildings, and Indigenous communities as well. So we are seeing quite a bit of interest throughout the province.
So when we talk to potential EV owners, people who are looking to purchase an EV, one of the biggest concerns that comes up is range anxiety, right? Like, am I going to find chargers if I take a trip across the province? Can you speak to how vast Alberta's current charging network is?
Yeah, for sure. So the charging infrastructure is continually improving and starting to increase throughout Alberta. Kind of the latest data from PlugShare, it looks like there's around 650 level 2 plugs currently throughout the province. And I'll kind of differentiate. There's kind of charging stations and plugs. Charging stations are often the actual unit or pedestal that's installed in the ground. However, charging stations often have 2 plugs. So it's not always a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you hear that a charging station has been installed, it often has 2 plugs that vehicles can use simultaneously.
So similar to a gas pump,
Mhm.
right? Like you have the one pump and you can fill up from either side.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, around 650 level 2 chargers throughout the province, around 180 level 3 chargers. So those are the DC fast chargers, which can charge your vehicle from around 20% to 80% in about 30 to 40 minutes. So quite a bit quicker. And then around 230 Tesla plugs throughout the province. Again, those are very quick. However, they're only for Tesla vehicles. So if it's a non-Tesla vehicle, unfortunately, they won't be able to use them.
So how easy or difficult is it to find charging outside of cities? So we know you work with municipalities. Is rural Alberta as equipped with these charging stations as, say, Edmonton or Calgary is?
Not yet. There is still significant gaps in the amount of charging infrastructure throughout rural Alberta. Most charging stations are found in Edmonton, Calgary, and along the Highway 2 corridor and throughout southern Alberta. There are gaps, most specifically in northern Alberta, western central Alberta, and east central Alberta. However, we are starting to see quite a bit more infrastructure being developed throughout rural Alberta, specifically through the EVCP program and the South Grow program as well. So it is coming, but there does definitely need to be more infrastructure installed throughout rural areas.
Is that lag just due to a lack of interest in those areas for electric vehicles, or are there other barriers that, contribute to why that infrastructure hasn't really caught up to the rest of the province?
I think a significant portion of it is due to the decreased or the lessened interest, I guess, in EVs throughout rural Alberta. We are starting to see an increase, and as more people want to purchase EVs and do purchase EVs, we will see more infrastructure being developed, which is really important for rural Alberta when you have to travel longer distances from stop to stop. I think there's been a lot of growth in the field. I know the federal government has committed around $700 million to increase the infrastructure throughout Canada through the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program. And they've also committed, I believe, 50,000 new chargers be installed throughout Canada by 2026. So we are seeing significant commitments from the federal government, as well as from vehicle manufacturers such as GM and Ford, who are committing to having entirely EV sales, I believe, by 2035 as well. So as we have more push from the government as well as from automakers, I think we're going to see a lot of increase throughout the province for EVs.
How reliable are these chargers? So if I'm driving along Highway 2, I know you mentioned that there is, quite a bit of charging stations along that corridor. How reliable is it? Will I have to plug in my car for an hour and find something to do?
Yeah, reliability is it's a major issue. It's a major concern for stations throughout the province. EV drivers need to feel confident that no matter where they're going, when they map out their trip, when they kind of find out what chargers they'd like to stop at and charge, they need to feel confident that they're going to be able to plug in and use those. We need to see reliability upwards of 99%. And right now, there are issues for reliability for a myriad of reasons: network connectivity issues, faulty installations, newer technology, things of that nature, which will improve as more and more stations are installed, better technology is developed, and installers have a better understanding of what they're doing, and we can improve that reliability for EV drivers.
And is there a way for a driver to check ahead of time if the charging stations along their route are up and running?
Yeah, there are some great tools that EV drivers can use. The best being PlugShare. PlugShare has all of the publicly available level 2, level 3, and Tesla chargers available on their app or website, where you can see if they're being used or if they're undergoing maintenance or anything like that. So that's a great tool to use if you're driving.
So a common worry for people, again, this range anxiety, will I run out of charge before I can find a working charging station? Do you think that those fears are valid, even with the issues that exist right now? We've spoken to a few EV owners and they've said, we've never had any issues. We've never worried that our cars were going to break down at the side of the road because we ran out of charge. So do you think those fears are valid?
I think range anxiety is definitely a concern for some people, but it's definitely, I think, overblown. Most new EVs have range capacities in the area of 400 to even 500 kilometers now, and most Albertans don't travel that far in a day. Most people are going 30 to 50 kilometers kind of thing. So as EV infrastructure and charging stations are developed throughout the province, I think that's the key to really reducing range anxiety, so people feel confident in knowing wherever they're going that there's going to be charging stations they can use.
And what about renters who can't install a home charging system? What's the outlook for them?
Yeah, that's a definitely a major concern for the EV industry. A lot of people are renting and don't have access to chargers in their parking lot or have to rely on curbside chargers. I do know that the Pembina Institute is completing a study where they look into some of the barriers and concerns and how to address them regarding EV adoption and charging station deployment in multi-unit residential buildings. So there are organizations who are looking into this and seeing how they can kind of mitigate that. Right now, I'd say if you are in an apartment building or a condo and you're looking at getting an EV, it'd be best to try to talk to the building owner or association to see if they can maybe install stations as kind of an investment for the property. Or else utilize the existing infrastructure they have right now, whether that be 120 volt outlets, which most parking stalls have,
Right.
so you can plug into the winter. You can still plug into those with an EV. They are quite a bit slower. However, they do provide some charge and some range to your EV, and then maybe utilizing DC fast chargers once a week, like if you're filling up at a gas station, just to recoup that lost range.
So it's not out of the question to own an EV if you don't own a home. It's just a little bit more challenging at the moment. But you mentioned we're seeing improvements there. Building owners are installing chargers in their parking lots. And yeah, so it's not totally out of the question for someone to own an EV if they don't own a home.
No, it's definitely not. There are options available. Taking advantage of curbside chargers are great. Sometimes the charging rates are cheaper or even free, so trying to take advantage of those, and then whatever DC fast chargers you might have around you as well.
Does the MCCAC work with private corporations or is it strictly municipalities?
So we normally just work with municipalities. However, with the South Grow electric vehicle charging program, we are helping administer this program for a variety of applicants, including businesses, municipalities, schools, multi-unit residential buildings, and Indigenous communities. So there is funding available for a variety of applicants through this program.
So those people could reach out to the MCCAC via your website if they were interested in learning if they qualify for that funding?
For sure, yeah. There's lots of funding available for a variety of different applicants to help build out that infrastructure.
Okay, so Logan, what are the biggest myths you've heard about EVs?
I think there's two major myths around EVs. The first being the cost of ownership is just too great for electric vehicles. While it is true that EVs do cost, $10,000 to $15,000 more to purchase compared to an internal combustion engine vehicle counterpart, the cost of ownership is significantly lower though over the long term, because EVs are more efficient. So they're upwards of 80 to 90% efficient compared to an internal combustion engine vehicle at around 40% efficiency. Your fuel costs are significantly lower. There's less maintenance costs because there are less moving parts in an EV. So overall, you could be seeing, decreased annual ownership costs of around 80%. You could see kind of a return on investment in EVs in around 2 to 3 years. So they are significantly cheaper to own.
So there may be a higher upfront cost, but overall your cost will be lower than purchasing a traditional vehicle.
For sure. And there is funding available through the federal government as well. Through the Zero Emission Vehicle Program, you can receive a $5,000 rebate when you do purchase a new electric vehicle. So that definitely helps incentivize potential owners buying EVs as well.
Thank you. What are you most excited about for the future when you think of transportation? Is there anything in particular that you're just eager to see come to fruition?
I think it's just really the increased interest and demand we're seeing from all aspects of the market and consumers and government as well. The federal government is really pushing EVs. They have a lot of money committed to it, really trying to build out that infrastructure, as well as automakers are committing to producing EVs exclusively in the future. So I think a lot of people are really starting to see just how many environmental impacts they have, and that they're more financially, and they're just a better option than internal combustion engine vehicles for most people.
Thank you so much for talking to me today, Logan. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our guests before you leave?
Yeah, thanks. This was great. If anybody is looking for funding for electric vehicle charging programs, the electric vehicle charging program specifically for businesses, there is funding available through the South Grow program. So that'd be great to check out.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
That was my conversation with Logan Hoyland from MCCAC. Charging infrastructure really is such an important piece of the puzzle when you're thinking of whether or not an EV is for you. And chargers are popping up definitely all over, but right now in Canada, the majority of them are really in the metropolitan areas, so in the cities. And that raises the question on how a road trip might go. We're going to dig into that, but first I want to introduce our special guest joining us, Kevin Chornohos, who recently offered up his podcasting experience to have a chat with a company that organized a charging coast-to-coast EV tour. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Krystal. Thanks for having me on today.
So I mentioned that you offered up some of your podcasting expertise. Are you able to tell us a little bit about your history with podcasts?
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to. So I started out doing some podcasts based on pop culture, most notably the Cobra Kai Netflix series. That was a big one that I did. And then I also delved into a music podcast highlighting some different musicians from down in the United States, mostly in the Nashville area. So that was kind of what brought me to working with AMA and doing our EV podcast. When I'm not doing that, I'm the registry supervisor for the AMA branch here in Camrose. So I get to kind of live a double life doing what I love on both fronts.
So we're so excited that you were able to do this interview, and thank you so much for joining us. And tell me a little bit about who you spoke to.
So I had talked to Mr. Craig Ballard, the president and CEO of Elexicon Group.
Right. And that company planned the Charging Coast to Coast tour this year. Is that correct?
They did. And the whole idea behind that tour was not only to show the potential of a cross-Canada EV road trip, but the tour also stopped off at 40 multi-unit residential buildings to chat about the EV infrastructure.
Right. Because, as a homeowner, you can just go ahead and install whatever charging infrastructure that you need. But if you live in an apartment or a condo, that's not as easy. And so my understanding is the Elexicon Group is really aiming to help businesses and multi-unit residential buildings expand their EV offerings.
That's absolutely correct, Krystal, because homeowners can now go ahead and install their own chargers. But for some folks who live in apartments or condos, it's not that easy.
Yeah. Awesome. And so how about we just jump into that interview with you and Craig?
And this is really a remarkable thing that he's bringing across Canada, the EV technology and the EV experience to people who aren't familiar with it, much like myself. And thanks for joining us, Craig. How are you doing today, sir?
Thanks for having me. Doing great, and pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. So I'm really looking forward to this, as myself and a lot of folks I'm thinking are in the same boat, that they're not totally experienced with the EV experience and the things that you guys are bringing forth to people. So can you tell us about the EV tour and when it was planned and why it's planned?
It was started with collaboration with Natural Resources Canada, sometimes called NRCan for short. And we had, again, collaboratively with NRCan, put forward a proposal to do a cross-country EV electric vehicle awareness tour. And by cross-country, we, literally mean almost every province, and starting in Victoria and working our way all across Canada right through to Atlantic Canada and all points in between. And the idea started with our flagship company called EV Start, which is a joint venture between ourselves and Wise Metering. We felt like this was a really cool opportunity to, and the timing was right, to bring awareness to, especially to multi-unit residential building residents, which is one of the most underserved populations in terms of EV charging infrastructure. And so we focused on that part of the market, and with a mission of going to those sites all across Canada, apartment buildings, condo buildings, high rises, mid rises, et cetera, and talking with residents, tenants, building owners and managers wherever we could, talk about the revolution in electric vehicles and answer questions about electric vehicle charging and how electric vehicles work. And to do that, we wanted to make sure that people could actually touch and feel and experience an electric vehicle. And so we have a convoy of several electric vehicles, Teslas in this case, that went from site to site across 40 plus sites across Canada. And all of those tenants and residents and anybody who was in the area had an opportunity to interact with the vehicles, ask questions about charging, see how the vehicles charge, and have an actual experience inside the vehicle with one of our operators. So that was how it all came together. And again, very grateful for the support of Natural Resources Canada as well.
Absolutely. And so, Craig, what are some of the common questions that you are getting from people upon your tour stops that people are asking along the way?
Yeah. So one of the most common questions is on range of the vehicle, and that's something that comes up. Is I think it's starting to change, but range anxiety as a term is a real thing. And so most people are used to gas vehicles and just stopping at the nearest gas station. And so people often have questions about the vehicle's range and also its range in different weather conditions. Does it operate the same in when it's 10 below as when in the summertime? So that's a fairly common question. So those are the most common questions, and also access to charging, particularly in multi-unit residential building environments. So where can I charge the vehicle? How can I drive to this location? Will there be charging infrastructure available? So those are the types of questions we get about electric vehicles. And then as people experience them, also about how, do they operate exactly the same way as a gas car? What are the differences? So yeah, there's a pretty wide range of questions, but those are some of the more common ones.
And have you ran into any challenges of any sort along the way with the tour thus far?
I think that there's a lot of work behind the scenes that goes into the logistics of putting the tour together that probably the folks that are actually at the locations don't necessarily see. So, hotels, meals, traveling from site to site, hitting schedules and deadlines. So there's that part of it. I think probably the one thing we've learned of literally going across Canada and the prairies, et cetera, is charging infrastructure is available, but there are some places where it's only available on major highways. And so one of the challenges we had is making sure from a charging perspective that we weren't going too far off of the Trans-Canada in some cases or other major highways that have charging infrastructure. The good news is that we were able to make it everywhere using only electric vehicles and again across the prairies, right through to Victoria and everywhere in between, and had access to charging. So it worked, and I think it's only going to get better as we go forward, and I think that's just going to continue to improve. But I would say one of the challenges is when you're crossing such large distances, and particularly in some of the less populated areas, just making sure we had enough charge.
Absolutely. And just for everybody's knowledge, which vehicle are you guys using for the tour, and why is that your selected vehicle of choice?
Yeah, so our vehicles for the tour are Tesla Model 3s. There's a few different reasons for that. I think one of the most obvious ones is it's probably the most widely available electric vehicle at this point in Canada. It's also arguably the most established electric vehicle. So from a reliability standpoint, it's extremely sort of predictable about how they're going to operate and their range, et cetera. Of course, many different manufacturers now are launching or have launched electric vehicles, so that's changing. But at the time we designed the tour and launched the tour, certainly Tesla was the vast majority of market share in electric vehicles. So that's one aspect of it. The second is that Tesla, as of today, still has the strongest charging network in North America, and that includes Canada. So again, it's improved greatly for non-Tesla vehicles, especially in the last year or two. But for us, from a practical standpoint, just making sure we could hit all the spots, had good access to supercharging network wherever we went, and also access to actually being able to get vehicles. We did look at some other types of vehicles, and we're interested. It's just we couldn't get them in time for the tour. So that's why we went with the Model 3.
Do any of these vehicles have some degree of towing capacity if a person wanted to pull a small, like a small tent trailer or things of that nature? For some of the folks that do love doing camping and going off the grid, so to speak, and for a weekend and whatnot, just wondering, do they have any of that type of towing capacity?
Yes, they do, and they do have some towing capacity. Towing capacity definitely has an impact, or towing load definitely has an impact on range, much like it would for a gas car as well. Electric vehicles have a lot of torque. So from a pure engineering perspective, science perspective, they're excellent candidates for towing, but it also has an impact on range. And so you may know about or you may have even seen some Ford Lightnings now, which are now just starting to kind of dot the landscape. I've seen quite a few just in the last couple of weeks at different parking lots. And that's a question that comes up often, especially for folks that prefer pickups. And I know a lot of folks in Alberta do prefer pickups. So that's a question that comes up a lot. So yes, they have excellent towing capabilities, but you have to balance that against range considerations.
So, Craig, you're stopping at residential buildings. What is the biggest challenge for people living in apartments and condos when it comes to owning and operating an EV vehicle?
Yeah, it's for someone that has their own home or a single-family home, it's a bit easier. They can contact an electrician. Sometimes the place where they bought the vehicle will arrange for them to have a charger installed. At a multi-unit residential building or condo, be it a rental apartment or if you're an owner of a condo, that could be a little bit longer of a process. So first you've got to identify who has control of the building. Is it a condo board, in which case you'll want to go to the head of your condo board or representative. Say, hey, I really want to get an electric vehicle, or I want to have charging access, and start the conversation there. In many cases now, these building, whoever is owning and operating the building is already down this path, as hundreds of buildings across Canada are installing chargers now. So I think it's a kind of a perfect time, and many building owners and operators are getting these inquiries every day from their residents. But that's one of the challenges. You can't just put in a charger tomorrow in your parking spot. That has to be in collaboration with the building owner and operator. And that's one of the things we're trying to address with the tour, and also as a business is making sure that building owners are getting way ahead, and condo owners and rental building operators are getting well ahead of EV charging, so they can keep up with tenants. And it's becoming an important amenity. And I think it's going to become a differentiator for people that deciding where they want to live is whether or not they have good access to electric vehicle charging.
Another question that kind of spoke up to me here while you're just mentioning all the apartment buildings and condos and rental properties is it an exorbitant cost to have these installed in properties, like for small property owners if they were requested by their tenants that they wanted to go this route? Is it a huge cost to the renter?
No, it's not, or at least it shouldn't be. Right now, many of these projects, in fact, most of them today there is funding available for multi-unit residential buildings and from Enercan and other sources. And so I would say in most cases, a lot of the costs, certainly up to half of the cost, are covered by available incentives, and many building owners and operators are taking advantage of that. So that's one aspect. And then for the tenant or resident from there are many different types of flexible programs where they don't have to cover that cost up front for a relatively small fee, certainly a small fee compared to the savings and benefits they're getting from operating an electric vehicle as opposed to gas. They can get access to an electric vehicle charger. So I would say that it's not exorbitant for the building owner. There are many good options and funding options to make this happen today. And then for the resident or tenant, I think it should be, and we're trying to make this a reality. It should be a very cost-effective option once they've acquired an electric vehicle to get cover the cost of a charging station. And then, of course, the electricity itself is very, very cheap compared to the cost of gas.
So with your tour going across Canada, so as of right now, how does Alberta's infrastructure compare to other provinces that you've visited already?
Alberta is definitely behind, I would say, generally speaking, the rest of Canada in electric vehicle charging infrastructure. It does exist. We were able to access it where we needed to in Alberta, but say compared to Alberta's neighbors to the west in BC, BC has a much more developed electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So I think Alberta, and our feedback from the tour is Albertans are very excited about electric vehicles. They are absolutely interested in them and recognize that the shift is taking place. So I don't think I think the level of enthusiasm and the transition is going to follow in Alberta, much like the rest of Canada.
It certainly is a very exciting venture that you guys are bringing across Canada and bringing awareness to electric vehicles and charging and infrastructure along the way. For those that are looking for more information, where can they visit you to find different answers to a lot of the questions that they might have via Facebook, Twitter, or any accounts that you can share with us where people could go to find more information on what you guys are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think probably the best place to start is evstart.com. And that's our website where there's lots of educational materials available and contact ways to get in touch with us, whether you're a resident or a tenant in a multi-unit residential building. Of course, anybody is welcome to get in touch with us to talk about electric vehicles or electric vehicle charging. We have social media accounts across Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, again, all on EV Start. So look us up on EV Start across on your favorite social media platform, and you're going to see posts about all sorts of things related to electric vehicles. You can get in touch with us there as well. So those are a few different options to get in touch with us at EV Start.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to thank Mr. Craig Ballard very, very much for being here with our podcast today. Again, he's the president and CEO of Elexicon Group, and they're going across Canada, bringing awareness to electric vehicles and answering questions that Canadians have regarding this new venture that's really quite exciting. We're going from coast to coast. So once again, Craig, thank you so very much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure. Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
My name is Kevin Chornohos from the Alberta Motor Association, and I was very happy to be here with you today and look forward to bringing you some information again in the future.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the EV Life podcast. As always, I'm your host, Krystal Maharaj. Make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast so you always know when a new episode drops. And if you have anything that you want to contact us about, you can do so by sending me an email at community@ama.ab.ca, and I'll talk to you next week.